You wake up before sunrise. The air is cold. The fire that kept your family warm through the night is little more than glowing embers. Everyone else is still asleep. You stand up and feel something strange, a wetness. At first, you think you've been injured. Maybe a sharp rock cut you yesterday. Maybe something bit you in the dark. Your heart begins to race. You look down. Blood, not a few drops. More than you've ever seen before, and it isn't stopping. A terrifying thought rushes through your mind. Are you dying? But another question quickly follows. If predators can smell blood from miles away, can they smell you too? And if this happened in the middle of winter, or during a long migration across dangerous territory, what are you supposed to do? Because unlike most women today, this may not become a monthly problem. In fact, there's a surprising reason ancient women may have had far fewer periods than women living now. But standing here in the cold darkness, you don't know any of that. You only know one thing. Something is happening inside your body. Something nobody warned you about, nobody explained, nobody prepared you for. You're somewhere between childhood and adulthood. And 30,000 years ago, blood usually meant one thing. Something was wrong, very wrong. But this wasn't an injury. And what frightened young women most wasn't the blood itself. It was not knowing why it was happening. The world around you offers no answers. There are no books, no doctors, no health classes, no internet searches. Only a small group of humans trying to survive another day. A day that begins long before sunrise and often ends with aching muscles and empty stomachs. Life is difficult enough already. And now your body has become another mystery. For weeks, maybe even months, something has felt different. You can't quite explain it. Your emotions seem stronger. Your body feels unfamiliar. Sometimes you feel older than your age. Other times you're still treated like a child. Then one morning, the bleeding starts. Today, most girls know exactly what a period is before it happens. 30,000 years ago, that knowledge depended entirely on the people around you. Some girls were likely prepared. Others may have been completely caught off guard. The truth is, we don't know. No written records exist from this period. Everything must be reconstructed from archaeology, anthropology, and evidence from hunter-gatherer societies. But one thing is clear. The human body has changed surprisingly little. Your fears would feel familiar to millions of people today. The difference is that your environment is far less forgiving. Because once the shock wears off, another problem appears. The bleeding doesn't stop. Hours pass, then a day, then another, and life keeps moving. Food still needs to be gathered, water still needs to be carried, children still need care, the group still needs to travel. Nature doesn't pause because you're uncomfortable. And comfort is something prehistoric humans rarely experienced. Modern periods are inconvenient. Ancient periods could be exhausting. There are no disposable products, no pharmacies, no heating pads, no pain medication, no private bathrooms, no comfortable bed waiting at the end of the day. Researchers believe women likely relied on whatever resources were available around them. Soft moss, animal hides, plant fibers, absorbent natural materials. Different groups probably developed different solutions. Some may have worked surprisingly well. Others probably didn't. But managing the bleeding was only part of the challenge, because your body wasn't finished. The cramps begin. A dull ache at first, then sharper, more distracting, more difficult to ignore. Today, many women deal with menstrual pain while sitting at a desk or resting at home. You are walking, climbing, carrying supplies, crossing rough terrain, trying not to fall behind. And that's where things become dangerous. Because survival often depends on keeping pace with the group, not because people are cruel, because the world is. Predators don't care why you're moving slowly. Cold weather doesn't care. Hunger doesn't care. And speaking of predators, what about the blood? Many people assume menstrual blood would instantly attract dangerous animals. It sounds logical. After all, you're living in a world filled with wolves, cave hyenas, bears, and big cats. Surely blood makes you a target. Surprisingly, the evidence isn't that simple. Large predators hunt using a combination of sight, sound, scent, opportunity, and vulnerability. There's little evidence that menstruation alone automatically turned women into prey. A lone human separated from the group was probably far more vulnerable than a menstruating woman surrounded by others. Which reveals something important. One of humanity's greatest survival tools wasn't a spear. It wasn't fire. It wasn't intelligence, it was cooperation. Humans survived because they stayed together. Ironically, the thing that protected you most may not have been a weapon at all. It may have been a grandmother. Anthropologists have long been fascinated by the role older women played in human survival. Long after they stopped having children of their own, many continued helping raise grandchildren, sharing knowledge, and supporting younger mothers. Some researchers even believe this contributed to humanity's success as a species, because information can be just as valuable as food. And for a frightened girl experiencing her first period, knowledge may have been one of the most important survival tools she could receive. That support may have been especially important because another challenge was quietly waiting, one most people never think about: winter. Today, a first period can be awkward. 30,000 years ago, timing could make all the difference. What if it began during a migration? What if your group was moving across open grasslands? What if freezing temperatures had already arrived? What if food was becoming scarce? Your body doesn't schedule major events around convenience. A girl could experience her first period while crossing unfamiliar territory, while traveling for days, while sleeping in freezing conditions, while trying to conserve every bit of energy possible. And energy mattered, because food wasn't guaranteed. Some days were successful, others weren't. A missed hunting opportunity, a failed gathering trip, a sudden storm. Any of these could affect an entire group. When survival is already difficult, even a small physical burden can feel much larger. And that leads to one of the strangest facts about prehistoric women. Many researchers believe they may have experienced fewer periods than modern women. That sounds impossible. Life was harder. Shouldn't periods have been harder too? In some ways, yes. But frequency is a different story. Modern women often experience hundreds of menstrual cycles throughout their lives. Prehistoric women likely spent more time pregnant or breastfeeding. Both can reduce the number of menstrual cycles. Nutrition also plays a role. When energy availability drops, reproductive cycles can become less frequent. This doesn't mean periods disappeared. Far from it. It simply means the average woman living 30,000 years ago may have experienced fewer of them than a woman living today. A strange twist many people never expect. And that's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Because while periods may have been less frequent, the consequences of having one could be much greater. A modern girl might worry about embarrassment. A prehistoric girl had something far more serious to think about. What happened after her periods eventually stopped? Because the bleeding itself wasn't what ancient families paid the closest attention to. It was what the bleeding meant. And that realization could change the course of an entire life. The body wasn't the only thing changing. Your place within the group was changing too. And for many young women, that may have been even more intimidating than the bleeding itself. Because growing up in prehistoric society wasn't a slow process. There was no long teenage phase, no years spent figuring out who you wanted to become. Life moved quickly. The group depended on every member. Children became contributors. Contributors became adults. And adulthood came with expectations. Suddenly, people might speak to you differently. Older women might pay closer attention. You begin learning skills that were once considered someone else's responsibility. Not because anyone announced it, because everyone understood what this moment represented. At least, as much as people could understand it without modern science. But here's a question most people never ask. Did everyone in the tribe react the same way? Probably not. Some groups may have treated a first period as an ordinary event. Others may have attached special meaning to it. The frustrating truth is that we simply don't know. The evidence vanished thousands of years ago. Yet, clues from later hunter-gatherer societies suggest that many communities paid close attention to these milestones. Not because they understood biology, because they understood change. And change could affect the entire group. A young girl becoming an adult wasn't just a personal milestone, it was a community milestone. Another pair of hands, another future parent, another person who would help carry knowledge into the next generation. And that raises another fascinating question. Did ancient humans actually know where babies came from? The obvious answer seems like yes, but the reality is more complicated. 30,000 years ago, people certainly understood that sex, pregnancy, and birth were connected. Humans are excellent pattern recognition machines. Generation after generation, they observed the same sequence repeating. But understanding that connection is very different from understanding how it works. There were no microscopes, no knowledge of eggs, no knowledge of sperm, no understanding of hormones. Much of reproduction remained mysterious, and mystery often creates stories, beliefs, traditions, ideas passed down through generations. Some of those ideas may have been accurate, others probably weren't. The problem is that we simply don't know exactly what people believed 30,000 years ago. The evidence doesn't survive. But we do know something else. Many ancient societies throughout later history treated menstruation as something important, sometimes powerful, sometimes dangerous, sometimes sacred, sometimes misunderstood. And while we can't assume prehistoric people believed the same things, it reminds us that menstruation was rarely seen as insignificant. People noticed it, they talked about it, they created explanations for it, because anything connected to life and birth naturally attracts attention. But there is another popular belief that deserves a closer look. Many people assume ancient women were automatically isolated whenever they menstruated. It's an idea that appears in some cultures throughout history, but projecting those practices backward 30,000 years is risky. The evidence simply isn't strong enough. Some groups may have separated menstruating women, others may not have. The reality is probably far more complicated than most people imagine, and that's one of the hardest parts of studying prehistoric humans. The farther back you go, the more uncertainty you find. Yet, while others may have seen meaning in menstruation, your immediate concern would probably have been much simpler. Pain. Because not every period feels the same. Some women experience mild discomfort, others experience severe symptoms. That was likely true then, just as it is now. And here's the frightening part. 30,000 years ago, there was no easy way to distinguish ordinary pain from something more serious. A headache, a stomach ache, a fever, a cramp. Any of these could mean nothing, or they could signal something dangerous. Ancient humans lived with uncertainty every day. You couldn't search your symptoms online. You couldn't visit a clinic. You couldn't schedule an appointment. You waited, you watched, you hoped, and often hope was all you had. But there was another reason this moment mattered, one that ancient families probably understood very well. The bleeding itself wasn't what concerned them most, it was what it represented. Because one day the bleeding might stop, not because something was wrong, but because something new had begun. Pregnancy. For a prehistoric community, pregnancy wasn't merely a personal event. It affected everyone. Every child represented the future of the group. Every birth carried hope, but also risk. Pregnancy and childbirth were among the most dangerous experiences in prehistoric life. A successful birth strengthened the community. A difficult one could bring tragedy, which meant that the first signs of adulthood carried enormous weight, much more than most people today realize. Yet, despite all these hardships, human communities survived. Not for years, not for centuries, for tens of thousands of years. Which suggests something important. Ancient life wasn't just a story of suffering. People helped one another. They shared knowledge, shared food, shared responsibilities. Archaeological evidence even shows that some individuals with severe injuries or disabilities survived for years after their injuries. That shouldn't have been possible alone. Someone cared for them. Someone protected them. Someone made sure they lived. And that same instinct likely extended to young girls entering adulthood. Because humanity's greatest advantage has never been physical strength. Compared to many animals, we're weak, we're slow, we don't have claws, we don't have fangs. What we have is each other. And that's one reason our species succeeded where so many others disappeared, including one famous human relative, the Neanderthals. For thousands of years, modern humans and Neanderthals shared parts of the world. Both survived harsh climates, both raised families, both faced the same biological realities, which means Neanderthal girls almost certainly experience first periods too. It's a strange thought. A young Neanderthal girl standing beside a fire, feeling the same confusion, the same uncertainty, the same fear, separated from us by thousands of generations, yet connected through one of the most universal human experiences imaginable. Moments like this reveal something remarkable. Human history is often told through wars, kings, inventions, and discoveries. But most people never experience any of those things. Most people experienced growing up, falling in love, raising children, losing loved ones, facing uncertainty, trying to find their place in the world. The same things people experience today. And perhaps the strangest part of all this is how easily we underestimate ancient people. It's tempting to picture them as primitive, confused, barely surviving. But the humans living 30,000 years ago were every bit as intelligent as we are. They laughed, they worried, they loved, they told stories around campfires, they cared for their children. And when a frightened young girl woke up one morning and found blood where there had never been blood before, someone likely sat beside her. Someone likely explained what they knew. Someone likely helped her through it. Not because they had modern science, because they were human. And that may be why stories like this feel surprisingly personal, because deep down, they aren't really about the distant past. They're about us. The technology changed, the environment changed, the challenges changed, but human emotions remained remarkably consistent. Fear, embarrassment, curiosity, relief, belonging. A young woman standing beside a prehistoric campfire likely felt many of the same emotions someone might feel today. The details were different, the feelings were not. And eventually the fear fades, the bleeding becomes familiar, the mystery becomes knowledge. What felt terrifying begins to feel normal, not because the experience changed, because understanding replaced uncertainty. The same transformation that still happens today, the same transformation that has happened for countless generations. For a moment, think about how many first periods have occurred since that morning 30,000 years ago. Millions, perhaps billions, different languages, different cultures, different worlds, yet the experience remained surprisingly similar. A moment of confusion, a search for answers, a realization that life is changing. And that's what makes this story so fascinating. Not how different ancient humans were, but how familiar they feel. The girl standing beside that fading fire wasn't thinking about archaeology, or evolution, or history. She was trying to understand her own body, trying to understand her future, trying to understand what was happening to her, just like countless people still do today. As the sun finally rises above the horizon, the fear begins to loosen its grip. You aren't dying. The predators aren't closing in. The world hasn't ended. The mystery is still there. But now it's mixed with something else. Understanding. Around you are people who have already walked this path. Women who experience the same confusion, the same uncertainty, the same questions. And long before written language, long before cities, long before civilization itself, that knowledge was already being passed from one generation to the next. One conversation at a time, one story at a time, one frightened young girl at a time. 30,000 years separate her world from ours. Yet in some ways, the distance feels surprisingly small, because the most powerful connection between ancient humans and modern humans isn't technology, it's experience. And some experiences never really change.